We mentioned that this was held indoors, the inauguration, which was the first time that's happened since January of 1985, when former President Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as the 40th President of the United States. So some historic moments playing out on that front as well.
And like we said, and like Catherine and the panel were talking about, a lot was said.
Yes.
So joining us to break down some of the talk versus action, we can talk to Cal State East Bay Professor of Communication, Nolan Higdon. Hello, Nolan Higdon. It's nice to have you here. And since you're a professor and an expert on what can and cannot happen by law, I'd love to just go over a few things. I'll throw out tariffs, drilling, deportations, executive orders, the Gulf of America, male and female. Okay, just tell us what stood out to you that could actually be done and maybe could not be done.
Yeah, thank you very much. And hello to everyone out there. You know, I think the thing that really stood out to me of promises from Trump that I think he won't be able to deliver on, one of the ones that him and his cabinet have been talking about throughout the day seems to be this issue of birthright citizenship. And that's something that the President of the United States cannot get rid of. It's protected constitutionally, and I highly doubt the Supreme Court would say the Constitution is unconstitutional. So I think that's one where he certainly overstepped. I think another one, too, is asylum. That's also protected here before the law. And there is a question about whether or not folks who are seeking asylum can be incarcerated, but it's very clear they have a right to be within the United States. So I think those were two of his larger promises that I don't see him delivering on. There are other big promises, things like the tariffs or purchasing additional states. Those are things that in theory could be done, but that's going to take a lot of work by Congress. You're going to need a lot of buy-in from Congress. And so that's going to take a lot of political capital. And I think Trump has made a lot of promises, but the way things work in the American government, they're slow to move and slow to get accomplishments. So he really needs to decide what he's going to prioritize to try and get achieved as this new administration takes off.
You know, I'm curious, as a professor of communication, if you could speak a little bit about that side of this whole thing, because if you define communication as the ability to persuade, then certainly President Trump can be listed among other great communicators, from Ronald Reagan to, some would say, you know, former President Clinton, former President Barack Obama, in the ability to talk to, promise to the American people in a way that convinces enough of them to vote for him after losing re-election after his first term, to come back yet again to win a second shot at the White House after all the scandal and everything else that's plagued him over the last 4 years. It is remarkable on that front.
Oh, yeah. Trump is a brilliant communicator. He's proven himself to be very politically savvy. So many of us were writing his political obituary after January 6, 2021. And that, coupled with all the charges he were facing, it was hard to imagine him taking back the White House. But here he is. And back to Trump's communication, he knows how to speak in very simple language and repeat things over and over again. So even if you don't like Trump, I mean, you have an idea of what sort of policies he's advocating for, what positions he's taken. That's the genius of Trump. A lot of other politicians who've gone up against him talking, vague ideas about saving democracy and things like that. But Trump has concrete policies that he is able to popularize, like things like building walls or deportations, protecting free speech. These are things he's promised, and he does a really good job of communicating that to his supporters.
Can he fill some of these promises by declaring national emergencies? Because he talked about declaring a national emergency at the border and over energy.
Yeah, presidents have done this historically. They've been able to use things like national emergencies or threats to national security to expand their power, basically to do things that traditionally the Constitution didn't allow the president to do. But anything the president tries to do through executive order, through action, there's always a possibility of fighting back from Congress and the Supreme Courts. But as long as the Supreme Court and Congress do not fight back, then that becomes the normal power of the presidency. And it looks like Trump wants to expand the power of the presidency in his second term, and it'll be up to Congress and the Supreme Court to decide what limits, if any, there are in that expansion of power.
But speaking of the power of the presidency, Trump said it right after Joe Biden pardoned all of his family and January 6th committee members and all of that. That sets a precedent as well. Talk about that as a move to stop the retribution that Trump has promised.
Yeah, President Joe Biden thought that by using his power to pardon, he could protect some of the people that he believed Trump was going to target with legal mechanisms for political purposes. So I think this may be a new defense mechanism we see from outgoing parties, but traditionally pardons have basically always been controversial. That's why it's probably a good rule of politics if you're trying to get to the White House. Don't be too critical of how folks use their pardons, because one day you may be that president and you may be receiving those criticisms.